here and bringing with you what you know and what you don't know and what you would like to know. And this is our 4 o'clock weekly Bible study here at Reach Sarasota online. And we're glad that everyone is here. We also like to do a self-reminder that we like to make sure that everyone has a chance to share and to participate if they would like to. And I would ask you now to join me for a word of prayer as I open up our study today. Dear Lord, thank you so much for this opportunity to share your word amongst ourselves and with anyone who might be watching. Lord, I ask that you bless our conversation. Please send your Holy Spirit to be among us as we continue to read in the book of Luke. And Lord, I ask you to be with Justin as well, who will be leading out in our discussion. Thank you for your blessings. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Laura. Hello, everyone. We're coming up to the end of the Luke, but we still have a few weeks here at least to keep discussing and studying this. So we are in Luke chapter 23 today, and we'll be in chapter 23 for a couple of more weeks. And it's a shorter passage today. We'll start with our kickoff question. Have you ever been forced to do something for someone else?
Not by someone else, for someone else, right?
Has anyone ever forced you to do something? Yeah, Phyllis.
I used to have to babysit for my little sister. I did not like that. She's not here, so I can't. But yeah, I was like 10, 11. I didn't want to babysit.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else been forced to do something? No? I'm sure everyone has been forced to do something. Either your parents forced you or at work.
I've had to do stuff for work. I think in almost any of my jobs. Some stuff is more fun than others, but.
All right. Well, that was an exciting question. Thank you, Phyllis and Laura. We'll see how today goes. All right. Luke chapter 23, verses 26 through 31. Somebody like to read that? Yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Okay, I'll be reading in the New International Version today. And it reads, as the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it behind Jesus. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me, weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, blessed are the childless women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed. Then they will say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us. For if people do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?
Thank you.
Welcome.
All right. What do you think prompted the soldiers to force someone else to carry Jesus's cross? Yeah, Sarah.
Well, I think they were just, they were afraid of I think they were afraid that Jesus was going to die on them before they got the chance to put him up on the cross. So, Jesus looked pretty weak, and, I don't know if he was falling down by this time, but he probably was. So they brought him in and they said, hey, come and, carry this cross. So, Jesus can have a little break here. So, yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else want to answer that question? Aaron?
Yeah, I always thought the same thing as what Sarah said, that he was maybe falling or something that prompted them to be like, oh, hey, let's find somebody else that will carry this the rest of the way. So that because maybe he he couldn't, because he was getting weak and stuff, maybe from what happened earlier where he was whipped and stuff, because the cross was probably like on his back where they probably whipped him and stuff. So maybe so I agree with Sarah.
I'd never thought of that question before. I just, read what happened and never actually wondered about the reason why behind it.
What I thought was important was what Sarah said about that the soldiers were not sure they were going to make it because of his weakness. And so that this was an idea, that they were doing. That was a new thought to me, but I think very, very fitting. They wanted to make sure they got their task done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We're asking the question in Luke chapter 23, verses 26 to 31. What do you think prompted the soldiers to force someone else to carry Jesus's cross? All right. So moving on. Let's look at verses 28 to 30 again. Would somebody else like to read that? Maybe from a different translation. 28 to 30. Thanks, James.
I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. I had it. But Jesus turned and said to them, daughters of Jerusalem, don't weep for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. For the days are coming when they will say, fortunate indeed are the women who are childless. The wombs have not become a child, and the breasts that have never nursed. People will beg the mountains, fall on us, and plead with the hills, bury us.
Thank you. In Jesus's day, what were women without children considered?
Cursed.
Yeah. I think it's in he's in Luke 1, where Elizabeth, his aunt, however you say it, however you like to say it, talks about maybe it's not there. I'm not going to find it, I guess. Oh yeah. This is what the Lord has done for me. That is, that gave her a child. When he looked favorably on me and took away the disgrace I've endured among my people. Saying that by having this child, it removed disgrace that she had experienced. Verse 25 of chapter 1 in Luke. So yes. So why does Jesus seem to suggest that those without children would be blessed in this other scenario he's giving? What's happening here?
I think it's going to become so bad. Something is good, so terrible to happen. None of us want to watch a loved one suffer. And, I believe that's especially true for parents and children, parents watching their children suffer. And so if you don't have children, you will be spared that extra special heartache.
Yeah, is it easier to move and adapt with or without a family?
Mhm.
Is that a question? Are you asking?
I mean, it
that as
was a
mark?
question, but I mean, it's a very quiet crowd today, so maybe we should just move on. I could just ask
I-
questions, and then the next, I could
I
ask the
couldn't
next
tell by
question.
the
I know,
inflection.
Aaron.
I think it's probably easier without, because then you only have yourself like to consider like in your plans. So probably easier for like you can say, oh, I'm going to go here, or there, or there. So imagine it's easier, but I don't know.
If you're by yourself, or maybe just have a spouse, you know, you only have to worry about yourself or maybe one other person. If you have more than that, either children or maybe older people, you know, parents living with you, you do have to take in consideration what they need, what they want. How's it going to work? Yeah.
Let's hear from somebody who actually has kids.
Yes.
Who are in the minority in our little group here. So let's hear from you, Pastor Jay.
Children are a blessing from the Lord. No, it's interesting because kind of like what Aaron was saying, it is true. You know, even Paul in Corinthians, he talks about how, you know, he wishes there were more people that were like him, that were able to, you know, be able to kind of be a lone ranger. But obviously that's hard, especially you know, in a culture, in a society where it was just part of life, you know, to get married. But it is true that Paul being married I don't think he would have been able to do the things that he did, or experience the near death experiences that he did. Or we should say it this way: he better not have experienced that, right? Because you would want to be with somebody who's not going to let you go to those extremes. But I think in this particular passage, I think the reason why Jesus is saying this is because of the siege that was to come on Jerusalem, and a lot of mothers lost their children because of the invaders that basically wreaked havoc on the whole city. So, you know, it's not necessarily campaigning for, you know, not necessarily, you know, not being parents or whatnot, but it's more of if you have, it's going to be harder for a parent to experience the loss of their children during this invasion than for those, of course, who don't have children. So yeah, but I actually have, and again, this is, I don't know if this is true, but I have a theory. My theory, and I guess I wouldn't publish this necessarily. I mean, this is live, obviously, so I guess I am publishing it. I think that Paul was married. And check this out. This is the reason why I think he was married, is because there's a statement in that says that in order to be a part of the Sanhedrin, you had to have, not only were you required to be married, you actually needed to have children. So they didn't allow the single guy to just be a part of the Sanhedrin. You know, the Sanhedrin, of course, was a group of leaders that would make a lot of decisions at the time. And maybe what happened, again, I don't know. This is interesting, though. I think probably what happened is when Paul went through the Damascus road and he had that encounter with Jesus, and he just went full blown, you know, on the other side. I think maybe his spouse didn't want to pursue that. And maybe, I know there's a lot of maybes here. Just work with me here. Work with me. Maybe he didn't want to, first of all, there was no grounds for divorce, right? And maybe the reason why you don't really hear about the spouse is because he was trying to protect her. Because if he would expose her to the fact that, I don't know. It's kind of again, it's a theory. I have no idea whether that's true or not. But we do know, of course, that Paul kind of was a lone ranger. But I wonder if that was just circumstantial or if it was something that he actually chose for himself. I don't know. Something to chew on. I have no idea, by the way. I'm not married to that idea. It's just an idea.
It's not the first time I've heard that theory about him being married.
Oh, okay. So
I don't
maybe it is.
recall the reasoning. It was several years ago, and I don't recall the explanation. It was I remember it being very plausible. So maybe it was similar to yours. I don't think they played it out quite as far. But I just
and rightly so. Maybe I conjecture. I give myself too many liberties to
No,
carry
that's
it out
great.
that far.
People have questions, well, if that, then what? Yeah, so good.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jay. So who are these women that Jesus is speaking to, or who do you think they are? So the first part, well, actually, before we ask, hang on, let me back up. My questions were listed out of order here. So why Simon? We kind of moved on already, but let's go back to that. Why Simon? What do you think? Phyllis?
Well, when we were reading that earlier, I thought they say that he was coming in from the country. So he is probably someone who doesn't know what's been going on. And so he wouldn't refuse to do this, based on whatever his beliefs were. Or he might be afraid to refuse based on what they might do to him if he didn't, carry the cross. But I just thought it was interesting that he was, and I don't know anything about being a Cyrenian, how that would play into it. I just thought it was maybe because he was coming into town and he really didn't know what was happening. He just they said, here, come over here and carry this cross.
Something I'm not, thank you. That's great. Okay, let's hear from you, Sarah.
Is there any, I don't know, I've heard that Simon was black. Now, I don't know if this is true or not, but I was just curious about that. I mean, it doesn't matter, but it's just, I heard that, Simon was a black man.
I don't know. I don't think we have any evidence of that. One thing I'm not clear on. So I shouldn't say I'm not clear on, but maybe I just am not 100% just certain to say this is fact, is that I kind of had the impression that Simon had come into town for Passover. That would be why all these people were in Jerusalem, right? That's what was going on. And that's where they would go. But him being a Cyrene, I don't know if he was a Jew, because one of the factors here is that if any Jew that would have carried the cross would have been, what's the word, defiled, and would not have been able to partake in Passover.
Oh.
So I don't know, but that doesn't mean, that in itself doesn't make him not a Jew. But I'm wondering if, and by the way, these are Roman soldiers, right, who could care less about Passover. So, this is all theorizing. I don't know, unless anyone has more factual information. But some good thoughts about Simon, the Cyrene. What do you think? Go ahead, Jay.
Oh no, I was just gonna say I think it's kind of interesting, and of course, timeline wise, I'm not really sure what the timeline looks like. But if you look at Mark's account, he gives a little bit more detail. He says that Simon was the father of Alexander and Rufus.
Right.
And again, I don't know. This is another good idea. I don't know if it's factual, but when you read the letter to the Romans, the Apostle Paul shouts out a guy named Rufus. Now, again, it could just be like a John situation. But I guess the idea there is that there may be a potential thing where when Simon carried the cross, he actually had some kind of a pretty powerful experience that he took back with him, and the entire family may have been, I have no idea, possibly, wooed a little bit towards Christianity, and maybe that's why Paul was acquainted with Rufus later. Again, it's not my idea. Somebody else made that idea, which I think is interesting. But we do know that as far as whether he was a person of color, I don't think we know that, but we do know, of course, that it was African territory. But of course, a lot of North Africa is more kind of Arabic, Islamic. So we don't. I guess we really don't know whether that's the case.
Right. That would explain where people get that idea from. The other thing that kind of supports some of the things you're saying is that it could be, like you said, Rufus. It could be just a different Rufus, but there is this like when these names are mentioned, especially I think after the Gospels and the Epistle and all of the letters and things like that. Sometimes we're like, why is there's just this person is mentioned once, or this name shows up once or something, and it's like obviously that person had some sort of importance. People knew who that person was at the time that the letter was written, and so it's possible that name was mentioned for a reason, that it connected with something else, or at least people knew who this Rufus was when Paul mentions it. And Mark finds the need to mention Alexander and Rufus for some reason. Whether they're the same Rufus or not, we don't know, but there's something some of the readers would have recognized who these people were. Otherwise there would have been no need for the author to include their names. So that is interesting. So interesting stuff about Simon. Okay. And some really great thoughts from Jay too on how it might have had a bigger impact on his life. Let's come back to again, verses 28 to 30. So who are these women, or who do you think they are? Yeah, Aaron.
Thank you. I was trying to find my raised hand. I think they're the women that, well, it mentions later, like some women by name, I know, and so that it was probably them, and maybe like Mary, maybe Magdalene. She, I know is, I don't know if it mentioned earlier, like women followed Jesus, but that's what I thought. Like some women, there was a group of women who were following Jesus like throughout his ministry. I don't know if that's in the Bible or I just heard that like in a movie or something. So I don't.
Carlene?
Well, verse 27 says the women that mourned and lamented him were in that group. So to me, that identifies who they are.
Yeah, that's kind of that's an interesting way of reading. Somebody want to read that verse from another translation? 27. We might get a couple of these. Yeah, Aaron.
King James says, and there followed him a great company of people and of women, which also bewailed and lamented him.
All right. Laura?
I have New American Standard, and it says, and following him was a large crowd of the people and of women who were mourning and lamenting him.
Uh-huh. Yeah, mine's similar to that. Yeah, James.
The New Living Translation says, a large crowd trailed behind, including many grief-stricken women.
So, yeah. So, okay. So, Carly, I kind of always had the same understanding from that reading as like what you pointed out. But then I was reading that there's a position that these women were actually not believers, like the close group that we see like at the tomb and stuff like that. That what it's talking about is that they showed up, some of them with children to be healed, some of them who had been healed at some point, some of them just there to like, because they were interested in Jesus. and they can't believe how the crowd is treating him.
Mm.
And so they are actively like wailing because of what's going on. And which is interesting because it's a subtle difference from those who were mourning him because they're like his close friend, or he's their son, or, you know, whatever the case might be, you know, the relationship might be. So it's subtle, but it is an interesting differentiation that does kind of set aside, like, because I think we kind of expect the familiar group of women to react that certain way. But then if they are an unfamiliar group of women, there's a couple of implications of that. First of all, like, why are they wailing, right? They don't know this guy. And so there's something in their, you know, some interest they have in who he is. And there's something they know about him that's causing them to like be very disgusted with the scene that they're seeing. And then on top of that, it has a whole lot of implications as to Jesus speaking to them too. Because if he's speaking to a familiar group of women, we would expect that. But if it's an unfamiliar group of women, that starts to like, you know, show us something different about the scene. Phyllis.
Well, when you were just saying that it could have been a group of women who were there trying to get their children healed or whatever, I mean, it could show that Jesus was able to read their hearts and they realized who he was, that and this was happening to him. Like they might have not realized that he was the Son of God until they see him, you know, being paraded through the street like this. And so he's kind of saying, look, I understand that you know who I am. I mean, that's just another potential thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anyone else have any different? Yeah, Aaron.
It is interesting though to think of them as not like women that knew him, but just like women who were there, like for whatever reason were there, and then just started weeping, like because of how he was being, you know, what he saw the crowd doing and what it was happening to Jesus. It just shows the contrast of their like sensitivity, I guess, like to like how we can become like desensitized to like other people's like pain and plight, and then like other people are like moved by still like with compassion for people, like yeah, because like sometimes like I remember when I was overseas teaching English, and I read in the newspaper about the tsunami, like one of the tsunamis that like, you know, killed a bunch of people in, I forget what country it was at that time, but like I remember I just started like sort of crying from it, and I was like, I don't know these people, but like it just like overwhelmed me, like the thought that like they were just gone, like so like I think like that's an interesting like contrast between like the crowd and the women like that may not even know Jesus, like they were just moved like with compassion for him.
Yeah, especially given what had just happened. Given our theories of the Simon carrying the cross would be that Jesus is actually faltering, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then there's that actually instigates this wailing reaction, possibly. Sarah?
Well, I also had a thought. Could some of these women actually doing, you know, wailing and weeping and lamenting, could they be being paid to do this? Maybe. I mean, that was just a thought too. I don't
Jay?
know.
Oh, I'm just kind of snooping around here, and I found that Josephus, the historian dude, he basically brings out that it was a common thing at executions where there were a band of women who would give a drugged drink, condemned victims a drugged drink, which was wine and frankincense, as an act of mercy and compassion. So one of the things that this particular individual is saying, that it's possible that these women belong to this group. So I guess that kind of answers your questions a little bit, Sarah. We don't know if they were paid, but it was kind of a common thing where they would come and just to numb the pain, because it was just out of mercy and compassion. They're like, my goodness, you know. So
Yeah.
So it could be this band of women that is referring to. I'm not sure.
Yeah, interesting. Good thoughts here, everyone. Enjoying this. So let's look at let's keep talking about that for a moment. So Jesus can't carry his cross, but he does seem to have enough energy to notice and to speak to these women, right?
Mhm.
So what catches his attention, and what does this tell you about Jesus? Anyone? Aaron.
It tells me that like he doesn't like when like for me, like when I get like when I'm going through a difficulty or having trouble, like I tend to become like more like focused on myself and like not so like reaching towards others, like and how are you? Or like, it's like I can become kind of in engulfed in my own thing or whatever. But Jesus doesn't seem for that to happen to him. Like he still like reaches outward to like comfort others, even though he's the one that's like, going through the actual like terrible thing right now. So that's very interesting. Like he's completely different than than me.
I love that
So, yeah.
observation because we see that all the way up to the very end. Like everything is like, making sure his mother's taken care of, the criminal who's being, executed with him. Like there is that. I mean, he's clearly not physically capable of going on much more, and yet his focus is still on those around him. Phyllis.
Yeah, and he's still prophesying
Mhm.
to these women. I mean, it's like even up to the end, he's trying to save people. And because what he says to them probably doesn't make a lot of sense at the time, but I'm sure that they would think about it, later. What does that mean?
Yeah. All right. Well, let's come back to this prophesying. As Jay alluded to, there was going to be the destruction of Jerusalem. Some also believe that Jesus is also going longer term than that, and that there's some parallels to the end of the world that are being drawn here. Not sure, what your thoughts are, opinions are. So let's look at verse 30 and tell me what you think of that verse and what you think it's talking about. Do you think it's talking about one of those instances or something completely different, or just hear from some of you? Somebody want to read verse 30 again, actually, just to maybe we're all on the same page. Thanks, Aaron.
30. Then shall they begin to say to the mountains, fall on us, and to the hills, cover us.
All right.
What was the question again?
Yeah, what is Jesus implying in verse 30? What's he talking about here? How do you understand this verse, or what do you think it means?
It looks like what he was quoting scripture. Because if you read Hosea 10:8, it reads, also the high places of Avon, the sin of Israel shall be destroyed. The thorn and the thistle shall grow on their altars. And listen to what it says. They shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. So it seems like if his audience was Hebrew and Jewish, I think they kind of realized what he was saying. Maybe that history is going to repeat itself. Maybe what happened in the Old Testament is going to happen in the New Testament. Yeah, something like that.
And so love that. So we have an Old Testament reference, and then John in the book of Revelation says, when he's talking about the sixth seal in Revelation chapter 6, and they hid themselves in caves and in the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath has come, and who is able to stand?
Yeah.
So is Jesus referring to something in the past? Is he referring to something in the future? And who's they in Luke? Phyllis.
Well, I think he might be referring to something both in the past and in the future. But whenever I hear that this particular phrase, like where the rocks fall on us and the hills or the hide us and the hills fall on us, I always think of the end of the earth, that this is around Jesus's second coming. And then when I was thinking that, then you said something about they. What was your question? Who is they?
Yeah, because then they will begin to say, who will begin to say?
So, those who don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God.
Right. Okay. I would totally agree with that from the book of Revelation. And I think that's why our mind goes there a lot. It's because we've heard this part from Revelation. I don't think I'd ever really cued into this, because this part of the story is only recorded in the book of Luke. And I hadn't really clued into this whole thing that happens with these wailing women until looking at the study for today. And so I'm just trying to zoom out for a moment and see, is that saying, is it the same they as John talks about in Revelation, or is it a little different? Or I like that it's the past and the future. Jesus does do that a lot. And prophecy is always like that. It's present tense and future tense, or it's something that's literal and also something symbolic. Aaron, let's hear from you.
I'm thinking that the they is the women's children, because I tried to figure out who, and I went back up to where he first started talking. He said, and weep not for me, daughters of Jerusalem, weep not for me, but weep for yourselves and for your children. And then he says they. So I'm thinking he means the children.
That seems very plausible, just from a grammatical sense, right? Because we're looking at verse 30 alone, but it's not isolated. It's part of and he's saying your children are going to wish they were childless, because the destruction is going to be so bad. So it could also say, maybe it means, well, I'm not going to go that far yet. I want to hear what Phyllis has to say before I say that.
Well, he's addressing them as daughters of Jerusalem. So I don't know if that has any context for the present day or the future, but I agree with Aaron that he says that about the children. But there's several places in the Bible where when they say, when there's something that's prophecy about children, it's like children of your children of your children. It's future, the whole, generations. So that may be what he's saying here. The they with the falling on us, the stones falling on us and everything, that's the children's children, not necessarily just these women's children, but for the future to come.
Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm not 100% sure of, and it doesn't seem really anybody is when it comes to this passage, at least from the little bit of reading I did, is that it's not clear to me if it's people who are just unprepared for how awful it was going to be, or is going to be, depending on which event you're thinking of, and therefore, in the midst of it, the suffering is so great that they cry for the mountains to fall on them, just to end end the suffering? Or is it people, is it like Revelation, where it's people who are individuals who hate God and hate all things that are of God, and therefore when God is present and God shows up, would rather cry for the mountains and the rocks to fall on them than to face him. So one is people who are not necessarily anti-God, but who are overwhelmed with the suffering of a situation. And the second scenario is those who are against God and all righteous things, and therefore can't stand to be in his presence when God's presence is overwhelms them. So I don't know which of those is the situation, but even if we're talking about the same timeline, both of those situations are very valid, because I want to not to get too much on a tangent here, but I think it's worth at least noting that. So there's one line of thinking, which is that, like the 10 virgins, you got to be prepared, or else you're left out. And the question is, what do you think preparedness means? Like in that case, right, the oil and the lamps and the Holy Spirit, do you have enough of the Holy Spirit to get you through that time and to last, even though the bridegroom is delayed, and then you weren't prepared and you ran out of oil, and then you were left out of the wedding party, right? So which would be, of course, eternal life, second coming, heaven. And so that's one view, and I don't disagree with that view, but there are those who believe that oil goes a step further and is also one's preparedness to dealing with persecution or suffering or things like that. And that is, and that the amount of the Holy Spirit you have is the amount of how you will endure persecution. And that's where I'm not necessarily 100% convinced, because if we look at his disciples, I mean, the 11 that stay faithful in the long run, not a single one of them was prepared for his death. That is, that we're now talking about. They all of them were completely surprised by that, even though he had told them about it numerous times and prepared them for it. But they still were not prepared. And so if I use the disciples in the situation of Jesus's first coming and his death here, it says to me that God meets us where we're at. And even though the 11 were not prepared and made some bad decisions and choices and things during that time, they went on to be like leaders of the Christian church, of the largest movement of faith in the history of the earth that happened there. And that says to me that God's not as tied to our failures in how we endure situations of crisis as he is to our repentance. And so because of that, I don't necessarily buy into the idea that, let me preface that by saying, I believe we should do everything in our power as flawed, sinful human beings to be prepared for the crises that life throws at us, and to not be thrown off course, and not to, compromise because we're in a compromising situation or something. I also God's grace seems much greater than that and bigger than that. And I think that the 10 virgins is really, it is talking about having enough of the Holy Spirit to not waver in my faith, in my belief of who God is, and in my trust in him. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be flawless in how I handle suffering or persecution, just like the disciples. So with that in mind, that's why I think that there are significantly different ways we relate to the story, depending on if we're talking about if the children are those who are rejecting God, and it's like a Revelation chapter 6 situation. God is here. I want nothing to do with God, and I don't want to be in God's presence, and I can't stand it. So mountain, please fall on me. Versus one who has faltered, or at least is shaky because of the duress and stress they're under due to persecution or life crises or sufferings. Because then they, like Peter, recognize how badly they behaved or how they were unfaithful in this moment, and they asked for forgiveness in that. So, that's just a little side anecdotal, I guess, point of discussion and commentary there on two different perspectives, because I feel like sometimes we just group all those people together, and we say that the faithful person who has a Peter moment, we put them in the end times, we put them in the same camp as somebody who's solely rejected God. And we shouldn't like condone apathy by any means, like someone who's just like, oh, I'll deal with it when I deal with it, or when it comes to it, yeah, I'll be ready for God. Like this whole idea of like kicking the can down the road, or that there's going to be some better me in the future of my own accord, not of God's accord, that somehow I'm just going to choose to be better in the future or something like that. That's a very, very deadly path to be on. I firmly believe that. I just also understand the reality of the human experience and watching his own disciples and how they handled this. I'm sure there's going to be people who are immensely faithful to God, but who will, have failings in times of crises. And that's kind of where I was at with that. Does anyone have any other thoughts or comments or conversation on that before we move on? All right. So verse 31. We didn't think it was tricky enough already. Somebody read verse 31 for us, please.
My version says, for if they do these things when the tree is green, so let me read that a little bit better. For if they do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?
All right. What does that mean? Aaron.
I was thinking it meant like right now when Jesus is with them and alive, it's the green tree. But when he's like, he's still alive in heaven. But when he's not on earth, physically, then it's the dry tree. I don't know. That's what I was just thinking.
Yeah, I think. I mean, that's. There seems to be several commentaries that would agree with you, at least on the first part, the green tree. The idea there's life in the tree, right? Apparently there's like a Jewish riddle. I don't know if I'm going to get it right. Something to the effect of, there are 3 sticks, 2 are dry, 1 is green. The 2 dry burn up the green. Something like this. So think about fires. If you have all green wood, it's really hard to start a fire. But if you have any dead wood, you can burn green wood.
Yeah.
It'll be smoky, but you can do it. And it won't be a big flame, but it'll burn it up. It'll burn it. And so if that's true, if that little riddle is a thing, it's possible that Jesus was referencing that, because the people there would recognize it and have been familiar with it. But a lot of people seem to agree that the green wood is definitely talking about the time when Jesus is there. So he's in the middle of this like immense physical and mental stress, right? I mean, he's fallen underneath this cross. He's not, this other guy is going to carry it for him. He's been flogged, he's got this crown of thorns. He's bleeding all over. Flogging, for those of you that don't know, it involves like pieces of rock and glass in leather straps. So it's not the same as being whipped. Like it's intended to like destroy you physically. And so that has happened to him already. And so all of this has happened. And so in this, he's talking about if they will do this when the tree is green. So to me, it implies that maybe it's happening like what's happening right now. If they're going to do this when the Son of God is in their midst, then how much more when he's not? And then we can talk about maybe what that means. But Jay, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I think that is interesting, because when when the invasion of the Romans occurred, which happened 39 years after the crucifixion. And 39 years is not that long in the grand scheme of things, actually quite soonish after the cross. But there was like thousands of crucifixions going on, thousands of crucifixions. There was a bunch of other stuff that is not suitable for live television, so we're not going to get into that. But Josephus does mention, and I just to give you a hint, cannibalism was a thing that happened because things were so desperate. There was literally people eating dead human flesh because there was nothing else to eat. So I think along to piggyback what Justin's saying, it could be also a reference of like the Greenwood being a time of, I don't want to say time of peace, but a time of, normal life. And maybe the drywood is the time of like severe scarcity, famine, war. And so maybe he's trying to let them know, hey, listen, if they're doing this grotesque thing to me right now in the time of peace, imagine what the Romans are going to do in the time of absolute warfare. So, yeah. Anyway.
It matches up with what the previous verses have been implying and kind of the conclusions we've arrived at for that too. So that would make sense that it's all like Jesus tends to speak within context. He may have a certain statement or phrase might have implications that are more eternal or more long-term, but generally, it still is contextual. And so that's a great theory in the sense that it totally fits within what was said before. I find little passages like this so interesting because I think they're like way more of a mystery to us than they were for the people. So what we don't find a mystery is the stuff that's already happened, right? Because we've seen it and it's historical. What they found a mystery was the stuff he was saying would happen, just like the disciples and him in 3 days, rebuild the temple and not understanding what that meant. And all of these sorts of things. They found all that stuff so mysterious. But then I think there's some things in the present tense that we find, we don't understand, but that I have a feeling they actually knew exactly what he was talking about, at least what he was referencing, because he was speaking the language of the day and using phrases that they understood, which I think is a powerful lesson for evangelism too. That Jesus spoke using phrases and stories and things that they understood. Why is everything agricultural? Why does everything have to do with like herds and land and property? Because that was the primary economic structure of everyone there. They could all relate to that. If they weren't a shepherd, they probably had a shepherd in their family. And, and they were very well acquainted with that lifestyle that was involved. So he starts using these as metaphors and these things and parables, and the people of the day understood it. Today we have to explain those things a bit more. So we're not in an agricultural economy, but I think that's an interesting takeaway from all of this. Any other thoughts or comments on verse 31? All right. Well, it's interesting. So I would just say, like, I read a theory similar to what Jay suggested about the Romans. I think that actually is a very sound theory. And it goes along with the idea of the destruction of Jerusalem that might have been referenced earlier. For some who believe that this is more of a end of time type of dialogue he's having. Then verse 31 becomes more of a metaphor, and a lot of even more so, because it has to do a little bit more with when the world has removed God from their presence. That would be the dry wood, and which is a little more of a abstract concept than what Jay was suggesting. I saw somebody put their hand down, just checking. Did you have a comment? No. Okay. All right. So let's ask some questions about how this relates to our lives. If you were Simon, meaning you went through what we read today. If you were Simon of Cyrene, how would this have affected your life? let's hypothesize a little bit here based on our own experiences. Aaron.
I would probably be traumatized, like, because of like having to like just do something that I don't know, like, well, I guess I don't know if he knew Jesus though. Like if I had to carry Jesus' cross, like I would feel like bad, like that I, was involved in that, I guess. So that, but I mean, I know I wasn't like at fault, but yeah, I don't know. I think I would feel, but then if I didn't know Jesus, then I would just probably just be traumatized from the whole like experience of being like, like you get over here and do this, like, like from the Romans, like I guess the violence of it, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, it's just a
Thank you, Aaron. All right, who's next? If you were Simon, how would this experience have affected your life?
I think I agree with Aaron. I think there'd be some fear involved because I was thinking about like what would have gone through my head if the Roman soldiers, would I even feel like I had the chance to say no? And I don't think I would have. I think I would have been scared what would have happened to me, especially seeing everything else going around. Would the crowd take me off? Here's Jesus and these other criminals. They're battered and they're bleeding, and I don't want that to happen to me because I know I could imagine how much that hurt. And so I think, yeah, I just think I would be, traumatized by it. But at the same time, maybe I would feel like at least a little bit of strength, like at least I got through this. I made it through. I can go home, like a little bit of gratitude, maybe. I can go home, see my children, Alexander and Rufus, and so know that at least I lived to see another day.
Mhm. Thank you, Laura. All right, who's next? You were Simon. Yeah, Carlene.
Well, I think that both of the comments before are most likely what my feelings would be. But then later in life, I guess could say after you have had time to see what all is happening and has happened, I might feel honored that I was able to help Jesus by carrying his cross. I'm sure that during the midst of all of this, I would be fearful and quiet and just, yes, I'll do whatever. But then later, I think it after I see the big picture, it'll come back to me as, oh, I'm so glad I was able to have a part in helping Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Yeah. It's a lot of times our questions are positioned about like in the moment, right? Like how would you react if you were in this situation or something? The thing is, I mean, years and decades probably went on were left in Simon's life. And did he forget this? If not, like, how did it affect him in the long term? So I appreciate that perspective. I think it's something to consider for sure. Not just how did you feel the next day or in the moment? How did it actually affect your life? Yeah. So if you were Simon, how would this have affected you? Anybody? Aaron?
I think if I wasn't a follower of Jesus already, it would make me think about it. Like just watching Jesus's reaction to like all this happening to him and like just seeing how he like responded and compassion and like wasn't like, beating up the people or like, like trying to fight them. Like it would make me think like, whoa, like this, if this is, God's son, then like God is a really loving, like person, like, and it would make me like want to be a follower of his. So I think it would draw me to him, I think, if I wasn't already a follower of his.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Aaron.
I wonder if Simon had any further trepidation about coming to the city? Like, was he a little bit more careful in his planning and his route? Like, he looked up the events page that day before going? Did it kind of affect his day-to-day business dealings? I don't know why he was there in the city, but did that affect kind of how he just went about his daily business when he did have to travel?
I think one thing that's apparent in this conversation is that none of us, I don't think any of us here, just gauging the reaction, have ever lived in any kind of a society where you're forced to do things you don't want to do regularly, like by military. So like that's like not an uncommon situation. And sure, the Romans allowed Jewish autonomy, and that's why there was a Sanhedrin and stuff like that. But ultimately, Pilate's the one and that has to like make a decision, and Herod, is also governor and things like that. And the Romans ultimately still have control. And there's Roman guards everywhere, and there's a Roman military presence. And if you don't pay your taxes, the Romans are going to show up at your. And it's not the same as the police. It's the military. It's a very different society in that way. So it might not have been that unusual to Simon as it might seem to some of us, that he happened to be standing there and a couple of Roman guards are like, you have to do this now. Especially if he's not a Roman citizen, because only Roman citizens had certain like rights in society. Yeah. So anyway, it's just something to think about, is like that maybe that aspect that seems very foreign to us might not have been as foreign to people of that day.
And there's people of this day where it's not that foreign because of the country they live in, the strife, the turmoil that's going on right now. They might not think twice of doing something because they have to as well.
Right.
For survival.
Exactly. Sarah, I saw your hand earlier.
Yeah, I was thinking about what would Simon be thinking, and like he probably never was, forced to, carry a cross. So that must have shocked him quite a bit. Here he's put this whole full load of this cross on him, and he has to drag it through the streets, with all this crowd yelling and screaming and, shouting and everything. That must have been, maybe he was just a country guy and, he was used to quiet and, calm. And then he's thrust into this scene that must have, that probably would have changed his perspective a little bit.
How would it have affected your perspective?
My perspective? You mean if I was doing it?
If you were Simon, yeah. How would this have affected you?
Same. Well, this is, that's how I would do it. Yeah. Just like, man, what did I just walk into? How did I get here? And how did I, why, I keep thinking, would I have said no? Would I have tried to run? I don't think so, because I was only one person. I can't run away from the guards. They'll catch me and make me do it. So I would have said, okay, well, I'll do this, but it went pretty shocking.
Yeah.
I think for the briefest of seconds, I would think, is this cross meant for me? Like, has something gone terribly wrong?
Oh yeah.
And is this actually something is this the end for me?
Right. So then when you realize it isn't the end for you, it's the end for this other guy.
Yeah.
And obviously you've seen his interaction with the women there. You see, I'm assuming Simon didn't run off once they got to Golgotha. He might have, maybe he was scared, but I'm assuming he didn't. And if so, he saw how Jesus like interacted with the soldiers and the people he loved and knew there. So then like, yeah. So if you think that if you have that moment of fear and that moment of like, your life is about to end and then it doesn't, and you see the person whose life is ending and how Jesus was interacting with people, what does that do to you? Like when you leave that place, like how does that affect your life? Not how do you feel in that moment? How does it affect your life? Phyllis.
Yeah, I think I'm like most everybody else that the initial reaction would have been one of fear, and I probably would have just done it. But I think that Simon might have been a little bit affected like the Roman soldier was. That once the Roman soldier was probably there doing things because somebody ordered him to, and he ended up realizing that Jesus was the Son of God. So I think that maybe Simon would have had the same sort of reaction that, he's in the middle of all this and he's probably witnessing without any predisposed, kind of thought, that he's seeing how Jesus is acting and how the people are treating him. And he would have an opportunity to say to himself, this must be the Son of God. Surely this must be the Son of God. And I think that would have then impacted the rest of his life. Just like I'm thinking that it probably impacted the rest of the Roman soldier who said, surely this was the Son of God. It probably impacted him for the rest of his life.
Mhm.
But I think that, it would definitely turn you, I think, reveal that this was truly Jesus, the Son of God.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Phyllis. Aaron.
I was just thinking also about like what Laura said about like feeling like, did he feel like what if they don't take this like what if they don't give like they just decide I'm the one that gets to die instead of Jesus or whatever. But I was thinking that I was like, well, that kind of makes it for him like the substitutionary like aspect of like the death of Jesus, like for Simon, like personally, it probably like adds this whole other level like for Simon himself, because like he literally had like this instrument of death, like on him, and like he was the one that was like, and then Jesus died in his kind of like in his place in a way, like not that he was like really the one, but he could think of it that way, like wow, like this was like kind of like Isaac, how like the ram took his place, when on the altar or whatever. So it's kind of like in a way kind of like a living I guess like allegory or whatever. But Simon, like for Simon, it was maybe more real, and like he took that in, like the sub, like for us it's like, oh yeah, Jesus died for me, but like it should be real like that, but like a lot of times it's like it's like a head thing, knowledge, instead of like a body knowledge or whatever. But Simon had more like maybe a more body experience of it, like of that knowledge that Jesus died for him.
Experiential.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He was like living it in that moment. Yeah. That's great. I appreciate that, Aaron. Our next question. Has someone ever extended compassion to you while they were suffering themselves? What would you like to share? Has anyone ever extended compassion to you while they were suffering themselves? What do you think of this question?
I feel like I want to say yes with a but. Yes, but I didn't know about it
Right.
because they were so humble and just living life in a caring, compassionate, Jesus-like way, that it was just who they are and what they were doing. And I was unaware of it, at least at the time.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Let's unpack that for a moment. So, how many of you resonate with what Laura said? No, just Laura. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, the idea that people have, but maybe you didn't know it, or you didn't know till later. So yeah, like why is it that way? Why is it that way that when people have been compassionate to you, you weren't really aware of what they were struggling with or what they were suffering? Why does that happen that way? Let's unpack that for a moment. Aaron.
I think a lot of people, like including myself, like don't want to feel like they're burdening somebody else with their like problems or whatever. And also maybe you just don't want to like be vulnerable to it's easier, I think, to offer, like to be there for somebody else than to let somebody else be there for you, I think. Like, or maybe that's just me. But it seems like that, like in our society or whatever. Like people don't like to be vulnerable with their like what's going on with them, like in their life or whatnot. So
Interesting. Thank you. I hadn't thought about that. I was thinking about that generally when we're suffering, we don't really see what's going on with other people. We become very like inward focused. And there's usually like in my mind that Aaron's thrown a third thing in, which I think is completely valid. But up to this point, I was thinking there was like generally like two things. And one is that people who are going to do that are also not going to advertise, because it can also, when that becomes manipulative, because it's like, I'm helping you, but I have all this stuff. If you only knew what I was dealing with or what's going on, like it can come across as manipulative, right? Like you need to figure stuff out for yourself because, you're a burden on me because I'm going through this other thing. Like it becomes manipulative in that way, just by sharing that information. So I think a lot of times people don't share it because that's not the intent, right? The intent is to help, be compassionate or empathetic. And I also think that it's the first thing being, of course, that we just don't notice what they're going through because we're just so caught up with ourselves. We might even feel entitled to whatever help we're receiving because things are so bad for us. And don't get me wrong, like we need other people's help. I mean, that's something, to address with what Aaron is suggesting, is that like, actually, like we need to be able to receive other people's help, like we need to be able to do that because there's just a lot of things we can't do on our own. And if we do think we can do them on our own, like that's part of the problem, and usually can lead to like additional issues, either unhealthy ways of processing different emotions or things like that. So there has to be a way that we can like, feel that we're in a safe community and receive help from each other and connect with one another that way. And I also think that, we're more likely to know if someone was going through something when they helped us, if they're a close friend, right? Just because we're gonna know more what's going on with each person. If someone who I am acquainted with but not friends with, if I start unloading, even though I'm maybe helping them with something, if I start unloading them all the stuff that happened to me that day or that week, it creates a very weird dynamic, right? Because they're like, okay, maybe you just shouldn't even be helping me, like it just creates this weird dynamic because we don't know each other well enough for them to know that I'm well intentioned in the help I'm offering, but them to also recognize maybe what's going on in my life. Like it's just a different level of the relationship. That's just a reality that we have. Relationships have different depths in which they exist in our life, and each of them comes with different situations. So those are some thoughts I have on that, but maybe something to look out for when someone's helping you or being compassionate. Consider, hey, what are they going through right now? With Jesus, it was very visible and very obvious. It might not always be that visible. And even if they are going through something, I don't think that's a reason to not accept help, right? From that person, or compassion from that person, because that's what Jesus did. And I think that's a good place to be. And honestly, I think part of being a Christian is knowing how to accept love, not just give love, right? And so that's part of our life too. All right, here's our last question. If you could put down a cross that you've been carrying, what would it be and how would your life be different? If you could put down a cross that you've been carrying, what would it be and how would your life be different? Got a lot of how would your life be different questions today. Aaron.
One thing I would like to be able to do is to like not feel like I have to fix like other people's emotions, like to just let them feel what they feel, but I can be there for them, but like also not to be like, oh, I have to make them like, you know, they can't feel this, like I have to save them or whatever, you know, and I think like I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but I think that would make me feel like free, like I think, because like it's kind of like I put myself in like this position that I'm not like meant to be and can't be. Like I can't like make everybody feel just happy all the time. Like it's not possible. Like so, and I shouldn't like try to be like, oh well, they shouldn't be angry right now. I need to like, you know, make them happy, you know, or something. So like it's I think like that, I guess so-called cross or whatever, like is not a healthy one. But it's just like I guess I just I mean it's a whole other thing, but yeah, that would be one thing I would want to be able to just like realize that like I don't have to or can't maybe just be that like fixer, I guess. Yeah. So.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
Mhm.
Anyone else? If you could put down a cross that you've been carrying, what would it be and how would your life be different? Sarah.
Just, I think realizing that what's kind of like what Aaron said, but realizing that I can't help everybody. You know, there are some people that I just simply can't help. And when I do try to help, I just end up getting frustrated and upset and angry. And I have to realize that I can't help these people. They've got to help themselves. And if I ever get to that point where I realize that, I'm going to feel a lot less burdened and a lot less freer. I mean, a lot more freer, because I'm going to realize that, you know, I have my own things that I have to take care of, and I can't help them too. So it would, you know, it would help me to realize that.
Okay. Thank you. Anyone else want to share? What's a cross that you been carrying? If you were to put down a cross you've been carrying, what would it be and how would your life be different? Phyllis.
I think mine would be worry about what the future holds in my life and in those around me. And if I were to let go of that, which I mean, I know that legitimately I can't control what's going to happen in the future, like I think Aaron and Sarah both alluded to. So I too would feel freer, you know, just to enjoy what time I have today, not worrying about all these what ifs. And it just feels the joy that you have today. I know that. Mentally, I know that. But emotionally, I'm not sure I live it.
Yeah. I have moments where I feel like helping people is a bit of a cross to bear. I don't know if anybody else feels that way. I know it's kind of a sketchy thing to suggest. I think it makes sense why it feels that way, since we're all sinners. And I also think that it's also because I'm not Jesus. And even he was under an incredible amount of duress. And while it's incredibly inspirational to see how he met the needs of others in during those situations, it was by no means simple or easy. And he even asks, in prayer that that whole thing be taken away. He just doesn't want to deal with it for a good reason. So I think that's, that shows us that it's not unnatural to have those feelings. Obviously, the thing I always run into is like, I feel sometimes like I would just be so liberated. And I mean, there are times when I disconnect, and then it does feel very liberating, like not have the emotional energy that is spent, when you are working with people who are in crisis, is it really can take a toll. But then if I think about like what a life without that at all it looks like, that's not, I got bigger issues, right? Like that's so that's definitely something I think about sometimes, but fortunately I haven't pulled the trigger on that one, because I also can't imagine what life would be like without that component. So trying to find a way to help people in a healthy way, and also rely on God for guidance as to how much, when and how much to exert, and realizing that sometimes when I'm in some situations that are very, very emotionally and time and also just time-wise demanding, to pull back from some other things that maybe aren't quite as important. Maybe I'm really investing a lot in somebody's life at that moment, as a single individual or a couple of people. Then maybe that's not the time for me to be involved in some more like volunteering over at the shelter or this or that, because the reality is we can't do everything, right? There are limitations. So trying to find ways to look at it in a healthy way and deal with it in a healthy way, so it doesn't feel like a burden, but also being honest about the toll and the duress and taxing nature that some of these things can involve. Anyone else have any other thoughts or comments on this question? I appreciate your discussion today. It was it's an interesting passage that doesn't get discussed a lot, and it's only here in the book of Luke. So I wanted to take a little bit to discuss it, since we're going through the book of Luke. And yeah, it'll be interesting to find out who exactly those women were, and how did that interaction with Jesus affect them in their life. What happened to Simon of Cyrene after that day? What's his story look like after this very dark day in Jerusalem? And lots of interesting things to think about. That'll be fun to find out. Let's take a moment and bow our heads for a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we just want to thank you for your grace and your love that led you down up that road to that incredibly awful situation, so that we might have a chance at life, so that we can be here today discussing a better way of living, that there's an opportunity to discuss that. There's something more that could exist than what we know now. And that's only available to us because of the sacrifice you made all those years ago. And we just are so grateful to you, Father, for having such love for us. Now we pray, Lord, that you would fill us with the same level of compassion and endurance that you portrayed that day, that we would still always look to the interests of others rather than our own interests, that we would be willing to step up for you when you need us to, and that we would be willing to step up for our brothers and sisters as well when they need us, and that we might find joy in the midst of any suffering that we might be going on, knowing that there's that the suffering is not eternal, and that there's nothing, that there's something greater waiting for us, and a life with you for eternity. And so we just pray that you would remind us of that daily, and may we cling to that hope, and may we be faithful in all that we do, Lord. I pray this in your name. Amen. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back next week, Saturday, 4 p.m. Eastern Time, the same place, to continue our study as we wrap up the book of Luke in the coming weeks. Thanks, and have a great week.